Jack, should everyone be counted for the purposes of deciding what number of seats a state gets in the House of Representatives?
Well, going back to the starting point, we don't count everybody, we only count residents. The issue is, should we be counting people who are not legally resident in the country as if they were the same as a legal resident or a citizen of the United States? That doesn't really make much sense. The idea that you want to promote participation of people who are not legally resident in the United States, you can understand it for political purposes, but it doesn't make much sense because it's kind of a zero-sum game. When you give some people more influence in the process of counting and redistribution, you're cutting down on the influence for other people who are legally in the country as residents or as citizens. So, speaking as a citizen, I would just as soon see the representation based upon citizenship or legal residence rather than people who are not legally resident in the country.
Don't people who are not legally resident still have a profile that marks them as civic participants, sending their kids to the schools, paying rent, often mortgages in a community, paying sales taxes? A lot of the markers, the signposts of engagement in a system, whether or not they're citizens. I understand your point entirely, but don't they have a stake even if they're not legally resident?
Well, they certainly have a status under the law and have protections and so on, but that is separate from the political process. And I think, once again, it's worth remembering that at the state level, as opposed to the national level, the reapportionment of seats within a state does not require the same inclusion of all people who are resident in the country in doing apportionment. You could do that on the basis of voting registration for a number of registered voters, for example.
Gerry, is this an area of law that's heating up? Are we likely to see any challenge to the long-established way of just counting noses and doling out seats?
Well, first of all, understand that the Census Bureau, when it goes out and tries to do its enumeration and count all the people who are in the United States, living in the United States, they don't ask questions about citizenship. And if they did, the numbers would even more undercount minorities than they already do. And it's been well settled for many years that the Supreme Court has given its stamp of approval on apportioning based on total population of each state. There is an legal issue out there about the use of citizenship data in redistricting, and it actually kind of cuts against the Latino community and other immigrant communities, because if the Supreme Court ultimately determines that the only districts that have to be drawn under the Voting Rights Act are those in which Latinos, say, are a majority of the citizens in the district, well, you have to use certain population data that the Census Bureau does provide in terms of estimating citizenship, so that there's a legal issue there about its reliability. But then secondly, as you pointed out, people who are in the community, they're driving on the roads, they're paying taxes, whether they're documented legal residents or not. And states prefer that everybody who is within their boundaries get counted for census purposes, and therefore should appropriately be used in the distribution of the political numbers within the districts for redistricting.
Mark, what states would be winners and losers if we took a citizenship view, looked at through the lens of citizenship at creating congressional districts?
Well, if we take a look at the state of Georgia, for example, which has had a big increase in its Hispanic population over the last 10 years, a lot of that has come from unauthorized immigration. So when you take a look at the entire Hispanic population in the state of Georgia and you ask the question, what percent of all Hispanics who live there can actually vote? It's only about 1 in 4 who are actually eligible to vote. When you take a look at it more like a state like California, it's more like half. And for the white population, for example, in Georgia, it's almost 80% who are eligible to vote because they're either a citizen or at least 18 years of age. But Georgia, when you take a look at Georgia, a large part of its population growth was due to Hispanic population growth. So that's a place where you might see some sort of a lost. I would have to redo the calculation or reapportionment to see if they would not have gained their seat. Nonetheless, if you take into that account this calculation of undocumented immigrants, you're probably going to see Georgia as one place that may not have gained a seat.